Hello, everyone, and welcome to Voices for the Voices. My name is Dimitri Frederick, and you're watching a Frederick Media production, which is a subsidiary of Frederick Capital. And today's show is entitled How Financially Secure is Your State? And so it's a good way to start the year because we're going to be talking throughout this whole year and many years to come about finances. And so today's show is definitely in line with the main topic is about finances and investing. And so the reason I wanted to do this show, and actually this is the first official show of the year. And so if you just watch the welcome introduction show I just did, then you'll see that I've already recorded a show in advance. And so this show was taped on January 21st of 2011. And so wanted to share this because there were some important things that happened this week that I needed to share with you, and it couldn't wait to start the following week of the month of February. So today's show is based on an article that came out in Yahoo Finance, and I actually read a lot of news articles from Yahoo about business and what's going on in the stock market and across the country. And so it was an interesting article that actually got my attention as soon as I read it, because I understood what was being said, because I've been talking about this subject for many years, and it's something that is very concerning to me, and therefore I needed to bring it to your attention. So this is why we're going to be doing the first show, is how financially stable, is your state, because that's a very important question that everyone should be asking that question regarding their state, regardless how, well the economy may look for your state. You should always be asking that question, because you'd be surprised to believe and find out that it may not be all that secure or, stable as you may have thought to believe by your newspapers, your other officials and government agencies as well. So the article that actually got my attention, which I'm going to leave under the subject description of the show today, and you could actually click on the link and then watch, actually read the whole article for yourself. Now, it's a few pages long, but it's worth reading because there's a lot of information there, and I've actually taken the liberty to highlight some key things that you may need to understand so you could get a better grasp of the topic at hand. And the title of the article it says, "A Path is Sought for States to Escape Debt Burdens." Again, a path is sought for states to escape debt burdens. So I understood what that topic meant automatically when I looked at it. And so I wanted to read to you a few things that was said, and just in the beginning parts of the article that really you need to pay attention to the next coming year as the economy gets worse, and we'll see how much it could be stabilized to maintain this euphoric belief that everything's okay, because truly, folks, the economy is not okay, and you need to be made aware of understanding why it's not okay. And so the first sentence paragraph starts off: policymakers are working behind the scenes to come up with a way to let states declare bankruptcy and get out from under the crushing debts, including the pensions they have promised to retired public workers. Now, that last statement right there is powerful, because including the pensions they have promised to retired public workers, and I'll be coming back to that topic later on, because it's a heavy issue which is going to be burning the states throughout the country. And so the article goes on to say, any effort to change that status would have to clear high constitutional hurdles, because the states are considered sovereign. Unlike cities, the states are barred from seeking protection in federal bankruptcy court. So, everybody knows that, a state can't go insolvent. And that's because for centuries, since we've been founded as a country, we've been taught to believe that everything is sound with our state. It's one thing if our finances is off track, but a government should never be off track, right? Well, that's not necessarily true. And so the article goes on to saying some members of Congress fear that it is just a matter of time before states seek a bailout. Sounds familiar? We just went to a bailout in 2008, 2009. So the only feasible way out may be to bankruptcy. So now bankruptcy could permit a state to alter its contractual promises to retirees, another key thing right there, which are often protected by state constitutions, and it could provide an alternative to a no-string bailout. Now, that's some powerful statements right there that was stated in this article, and you need to fully grasp the understanding of what does that mean to you and your family as a whole. And so, to start off, I need to talk about former President George Bush, who actually, with the help of Cheney, while Bush was looking for weapons of mass destruction, Cheney was actually working with the federal government and busy rewriting all the law books in the federal government that gives them total power and eminent domain to actually make any decision, make any laws, and change any laws that they want to. And so you need to understand that up front, because that's where this whole idea of bankruptcy comes into play, because with that new law that Cheney was put in place when Bush and Cheney was in office, it allowed them to make these changes as need be. And so our government, and in particular President Obama, will probably have access to that same constitutional right that they have actually changed in the law books, so that they themselves could go about making this possible, because there's a lot of states, which I'll be talking about throughout this conversation today with you, that are in serious dire need of a bailout, because they are financially broke, just like we are broke every day today, struggling to make ends meet. And so you need to be aware of why nothing is new, under this administration just because it's President Obama. But you need to understand that there is some significant reasons why states will be going through a bailout themselves, because of the burden of pensions. And people haven't talked about pensions, but I've been talking about pensions for a long time, because pensions have a history that you need to understand about, and why it's a very critical thing that's going to damage and destroy a lot of states because of what they've been doing with people's pensions. And so, and in particular, actually, that President Obama last year only declared that retirees right now will not be getting any adjustment rates in their pensions. So that was a key point he already made last year, which kind of goes into this next phase, why this article was even written out in the first place. But what's interesting, though, is that don't you wish that you as an individual person could actually write off your debts just to file bankruptcy, or create all the corruption and do all the things that you don't think is sound, but you just do it anyway just to financially make the state look good? Well, we don't have the right to and ability to do that as an individual person, but a state does. And so states have been doing a lot of things with people's pensions, and actually have been draining it in many states. For example, that you will never imagine that someone that you trust to take care of your needs when you are retired and enjoying your supposed golden years, to have taken your retirement money and just use it and spend it. Because our government, for one thing, have always believed in this philosophy that we always have time to catch up. And so former President Bush actually gave in 2006 many corporations time to catch up and actually pay into pensions. And actually GM actually was one of the companies in particular that was given the option to do that. And whether or not they did it will be seen in the next coming years. And so, to go in further, I want to talk about next is about mini bonds and treasury bonds, and how does that relate to this topic? Because if you've been paying attention the last 3 months in particular, there's a lot of investors that's been buying these bonds, and the expectation that, hey, this country is sound, our states are sound, so therefore we could put our faith and trust that this country could pay back its debt. And therefore a lot of investors, they just been, secretly, those who are affluent, been actually buying all these bonds, in particular mini bonds and treasury bonds, and hoping that they will recoup tremendous wealth and financing down the road. Well, in this case, that may not be true, because if an article like this is coming out, it actually means a big problem for all these investors who believe that, hey, their money is sound invested and actually bailing out the government by taking on the debts. Aside from other countries like China that will take on our debts, we have bond issuing capabilities as well. Well, understanding that the affluent, they may be affluent for a reason, but financially to be taking a big hit and a big burden like this, which means that all that investment that they've made could all go wiped out, because states could easily file Chapter 9 filing, which actually allows them to declare any unsecured debts as non-involved now, and therefore just like anything else, wipe it out like you had never had any debts in the first place, or just reduce the amount of payment that needs to be returned back for taking out those treasury bonds and mini bonds. So understand that it is a big problem for the wealthy who actually been investing many years and have always believed that bonds are a secure way to help protect and help this country into its tough times. Well, understand that we're in a new era, new times, and things are changing. And for even the smartest educated investors who's been in the industry for many years, they have to also be careful what they're doing, because things are changing for them as well. So nothing is secure and nothing is going to be the same like we're used to having it for the next coming years to come. So please be aware of that. The next thing is we need to look at the bigger picture. So if a state could file for bankruptcy, then look at the individual person. Is there a lesson to be learned in this situation? Because it's one thing to just easily file for bankruptcy, but it's another thing to actually be being educated, being smart about your money, and understanding why did you get in debt in the first place. And so just like the individual person, I spend a lot of time talking to people who's in debt, and I'm looking at debts and situations, even myself in the past when I was in debt, understanding that why did I get myself in that situation, what did I not understand about finances, and what did I do understand about finances, and also what do I need to change about my finances so that I could never get myself in that situation. Well, I think a lot of people may have learned their lessons and maybe now financially struggling to get back to where they were financially at one point in time. Well, maybe that's the same situation, when you look at the government, because is there a lesson that they're going to learn from this? I doubt there is, because just like big businesses and big corporations and people who have a tremendous amount of money, I don't think they really take the time to reevaluate the situation at hand and saying to themselves, you know what, maybe we went about this the wrong way. Maybe we just took advantage of the situation and never thought fully that we could be hurting. And I really believe that a lot of the affluent, wealthy people in America today, or even investors outside of the country, are taking advantage of the fact that, hey, those are less fortunate, well, it's too bad. We're going to take advantage of the situation and financially empower ourselves further. And I think this time around, the situation is going to be a lot different. It's not going to be an easy income, wealth generating, profit finding business opportunities by the same methods that we used to do for almost a century or so now. So a lot of things have to be changed. And one in particular is just understanding that the way we thought about finances, the way we've invested in finances in the past is not going to be the same. And so a lot of investors are facing the same problem. And I don't think that, just like the average person who's struggling to pay bills and make ends meet, I don't think big businesses and even the government today are thinking the same light that, hey, this is just, small or big problem to them. But here's the problem overall, though. They've always passed the buck to the next generation. And so maybe they're not taking this seriously, or maybe they're just, hey, brushing it off like it's nothing new. Because, government has been around a long time, and they have the ability to create and change laws. And that's all great, but at the same time, what is the lesson learned from the mistakes that's being made? Because we've already been to one whole decade of financial success and financial failures at the same time period. So what is going to change in this second decade that we're going into this year? So, this is 2011. It's a year to start new, and if you're a spiritual person, understanding the whole concept of, completion of, first 7 years of God's completion of life and creation, and, 2011, good 10-year decade. It's a time for a new beginning, to start fresh. There's many significance to the number 10, and I'll be talking about that in other shows down the road. But, I think our governments need to look at that and reevaluate, how we're going about doing business. Is it the same old business status quo as always, or are we going to learn the lessons from our mistakes and try to change going forward? Because if there's no lesson learned, really have you changed? You're just repeating the same mistakes over and over. And so how different are you from the regular middle class person who's struggling to make ends meet? Maybe you have to consider for bankruptcy, but cannot change the laws to their favor to help them bail themselves out, while the government on the opposite end could continue to make the same mistakes over and over and bail themselves out each single time. Because understand that the taxpayers are the one who pay for this every single time. So maybe they don't have no obligation, nothing tied to them for why they must change. And so I think until the big corporations, the big investors financially get hit in their pocket to understand that they have to change as well, I don't think nothing else is going to change. It's going to be the same old stuff, nothing different. Same, public officials in office promising change, but can never deliver change, because it takes a mindset, shifting of the mindset for change to come about. And so if you're repeating the same things and just, like I like to call it, putting bandage on every problem and hoping that that bandage doesn't come off before you finish your term or retire or die off, maybe you're okay with that. But there's a tremendous problem to come, and I think big business, big corporation, big government may not be fully thinking about the bigger picture at hand to solve the bigger problems coming our way. And so bankruptcy may be an easy solution for the time being, but it's just a band-aid that's being put on for the time. So think about that. One of the things when I look at this article is that, I've been predicting this stuff to happen for the last couple of years. And because I truly understand and having a vision and foresight from the things I've talked to people about, the things I've experienced in life and business, to understand that this is nothing new. So it was no surprise, for some people maybe this is the first time hearing about this, that their state could possibly go bankrupt. But you had to have read the books that I've read. One in particular is actually Fran Hawthorne, who actually wrote a book a few years ago, just read it last year, called Pension Dumping. And so what I was saying to people didn't get confirmed tremendously until I read that book last year and understood just in the title, Pension Dumping. And that book is a very hard book to read, in the sense that you will get pissed off or will be crying, because it tells you the true stories of what corporate America has been doing with people's pensions. And so if you don't understand the story that I'm sharing with you, you don't understand the article that you're reading later on about why this is a serious issue that you need to pay attention to, then you need to read the book Pension Dumping by Fran Hawthorne, because that book talks about pensions in the sense that for the last 30 plus years, and I have to go back a little bit in history, because pensions been around for over 100 years. And so Fran Hawthorne wrote this book understanding that since the 80s and since the 70s and 60s, companies have actually been filing bankruptcy. And the reason for filing for bankruptcy is actually a way to get out of the burden of the pensions that they promised retirees that they would get. And so before I even could get into that aspect of things, you need to understand a little bit about pensions and where pensions come from. And ERISA in the 70s created pension program called PBGC, in other words, Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. And when I hear the title of that, it's kind of scary when you hear the word guarantee. And what that did is actually in the 70s, and when and you got to think about also going back to the market crash in 1929, as well as the Great Depression, as families were recovering and the economy was growing again. For the first time in history, the first largest corporation, I believe in the 70s, was in the railroad industry, actually filed for bankruptcy. And so when they filed for bankruptcy, it was a devastating factor for the governments and the states to realize that, wow, a whole company could lay people off in that amount of size, thousands and thousands of people. And so, ERISA was created, and then ERISA then created PBGC. And so that's where that, in a short, explanation where PBGC came from. And so the creation of PBGC is like a lot of things, which I'll talk about further about one future agency that's being talked about being created right now to do the same thing. And so, and for corporations that will do for the states. So PBGC, was never really thought about, which is something that's created to fix, like I said, a bandage for a short-term solution to a bigger problem. And that bigger problem was companies that, after years and almost a century of promising, because it took about a century for pensions to actually become mainstream, for people to really be offering pensions as a benefit package in their retirement portfolio. So by the time the 90s came, the 1900s come, and you're looking at the 70s and 80s, companies started realizing that it was even better to take off the burden having to pay out, because they made this promise, and a promise they didn't realize how much of a burden it was going to be to them to have to pay out, because they didn't really fully calculate this pension philosophy into their books. So when it came down to profits, well, guess what? It made them look like they were negative, because they had to shell out. And also you have to think about the first group of baby boomers, or before I should say pre-baby boomers, their parents, that is, were retiring. And so, for the first time in history, America had to actually pay out. So it wasn't a big deal, because, there was enough people, which was the boomers, working to compensate for the pensions that had to be paid out. But as the years progressed and things got even harder, more and more people were retiring, and companies financially could not afford to pay out pensions. And so PBGC became now the savior for corporate America to easily dump their pensions. And so over the next decades, from the 70s to the 80s and so on, there was a tremendous amount of companies that was actually dumping their pensions, and a lot of them easily, and it was legally binding, that the government made it possible to bankruptcy law so that the companies don't have to pay out, and it allowed them to restructure the company. And most importantly, when the investors come to look at a company that in financial dire needs of a savior, the first thing they ask them is, what do you have for liability? And so, it's hard for you to believe that, you could think about your parents or your pension as a liability, but in bankruptcy attorney corporate America, that's how they look at it. And therefore, when they look at the books, they look at, hey, that's a liability. You have tremendous overhead, and most importantly too, that these pensions was not being paid or being kept up. So you had companies that promised to pay the equivalent of what they would be putting in as you as an employee at the corporation or company, but it was never being put in fully amounts. And so that created a strain onto corporations, and therefore they had to find a way to get out of that burden, and that burden was to file for bankruptcy. So it was a business strategy that was done, and again, a lot of companies followed suit and actually bail out. And I truly believe that during the course of 2008, during the financial crisis for the housing market, that was one aspect that allowed a lot of companies who didn't at the time file for Chapter 11 protection, use that time in that period to actually file for bankruptcy, to actually separate themselves from the pensions that they will promise to pay out to baby boomers in the next coming years. And so that's the quick history about pensions. And so you need to understand the full relevance of that topic, because when you look at HMOs, I really believe, from my reading of friend Hawthorne's book, that's the next big issue coming about. And there's many issues coming about that I could talk about, but when you look at the next biggest hurdles, next biggest bailout to come that's going to crush our economy, that's the next one. Because right now, as as far as the last week or so, there's been a lot of talks going on about repealing Obama's healthcare package. There's two ways to look at it. Hey, you either have it or you don't have healthcare. But also, either if you don't have it, being forced to pay out of money that you don't have in the first place. And that's the reason why, because everybody understands today the need for healthcare. It's not a matter whether or not you understand the need. It's a matter whether you financially could afford the need to have healthcare. And so whether or not you're creating universal healthcare, which is true, I say the healthcare package was just not a bandage put together so that people could say that they created a healthcare package. But whether or not it's truly efficient to meet the needs of America, it's not. But I guarantee you the next couple of years, and I will be doing a show on that later on in the future, there will be a readjustment, not the same readjustment that's about to be done to the healthcare package, but I think a real readjustment that needs to be evaluating the true need of the people, and also understanding that fully within the next coming years, we cannot attach a job to healthcare. And I think by the time that's said and done, it's going to take about 2025 before HMOs realize and government realize that the two have to separate, because more and more people will be laid off without job, and therefore how can you get healthcare when your job is the main stream of source of means to getting healthcare? So it doesn't make sense, but like I said, corporate greed is at its highest peak right now. So therefore, no one cares. As long as they continue to make the trillions upon trillions of dollars that's being made from HMO every single year, well, why separate it? I won't separate it as a business person, because it makes financial sense to them to continue to make the income. But if you care about people, you understand that the job market is changing. You will have no choice, and by that time, the only choice HMOs will have when it's becoming a bailout situation for them, whereas the burden having more baby boomers retiring and having need for healthcare, and it's not no longer financial sense for healthcare to be provided to HMOs, and then they'll give it to the government and say, hey, go ahead and take care of the burden of all the headaches to come with healthcare. So that's another story, like I said. And so just want to give you a heads up about that, because there's a lot of issues facing our country right now, and you need to be made aware to understand that. That's why the show is about, and there to help you become financially literate, as well as financially smart and savvy about what you're about to do in the next coming years to make sure you position yourself in a better situation. Remember, my unofficial show title was Set Your House in Order, and so this topics will help you set your house in order so you can understand what you need to do to help change your financial income in the next coming years. Going forward, I wanted to go back and read one more article, statements within the article, and it says the unfunded pensions become unsecured debts in municipal bankruptcy and may be reduced. And the law makes it easier for a bankruptcy city to tear up its labor contracts than for bankrupt company. And this was an article, like I said, from Yahoo Finance, and the gentleman that just said that statement is James Spaiotto, and he's the head of bankruptcy practice at Chapman and Cutler in Chicago. The reason I mentioned that because it's an interesting statement that he made, because there was two key things that he said in that. It says it makes it easier for companies to get rid of their labor contracts. And so that's another thing you have to pay attention to the next coming year, as a lot of companies, a lot of businesses will get rid of their unions or force the unions to bend their arms, because now they have the power. The 70s and 60s, the unions had the power. Now the time and it has shifted. No longer do unions have power to actually demand and what they want. And so when you look at unions, you need to think about the fire departments, the police department, the MBTA, nurses, and as well as airline industries. So all of these industries are actually in dire need, and there's usually union-based companies that will see a lot of impact based on this statement that was put out there this Friday. And so what does that mean to you in your bottom line? Well, when you hear things like that, usually means strikes. And so a lot of these industries, they are strike driven. And so when something happens, where their finances, their pensions, their retirement, their income, weekly checks are in question, you will see a lot of strikes be taking place within this year if things progress the way I expect them to progress. So Mr. Soto has designed also an alternative solution, and what's funny about that is kind of similar to PBGC. And so his title for his solution is called Public Pension Funding Authority, and what that allows is similar to PBGC, but it allows the government, the federal government, I would say, to take control and actually start helping out or bailing out, in other words, these companies, these states that's already in trouble. And so, if you are not aware, there's a very, familiar line to what's being stated in this article, because there's another book that I read, which is another powerful book that you should read, because it kind of goes in line with Fred Hawthorne's book, Pension Dumping. And this is a book that was written by Roger Lowenstein, and he talks about the same issues. And the only difference, though, is that he talks about it from a perspective of the average worker, everyday worker. And the title of his book is called While America Age. It's a very interesting book that you should read to get a perspective. Like Fred Hawthorne's book is about corporate America, what they did. Well, the interesting thing about Roger Lowenstein's book is that it's coming from the perspective of what we as regular employees day to day have done to corporate America, and also by abusing our rights, where the perks, the vacations, the retirement package deals, and a lot of companies didn't understand what they were doing with pensions in the first place. So, they had no choice, and the unions, had power at the time, like I said, and therefore they just took advantage of the situation and got all the perks that they always wanted for financial success, which is another interesting story that I will do later on, because you got to look at both perspectives to understand that nothing is different. It's actually the same stuff. It's just that we get to get more mad at the millions upon millions of dollars that corporate America gets to take out on the behalf of its employees versus the thousands of dollars that regular employees don't get to take advantage of for their retirement. But in the aspect of looking both things fairly, you have to understand that at the same time, see, the pensions that you get, see, you're just an average individual person, so therefore you're not in the big limelight of a big corporate head executive that actually take a big $1 million retirement package deal that was sweeten the deal of being forced to leave. Well, on the flip side, you look at yourself who's just retired. Well, you have many years, 20 years, so look at which one is worse. You can't compare apples to apples because they're both the same, because that millions of dollars is the same equivalent as the millions of dollars that's been stretched out over 20 years or how long you will live as a retired employee. So that book really talks about the nitty and gritty of what's been done from the perspective of us as an individual employees. So, but the one thing that I do want to mention for referencing this book is that Robert Lowenstein asks in the first section of the book this interesting question: who owns GM? Because he looked at the overall problem of GM during its time, and the beginning of 2010, 2011, it has emerged, also from bankruptcy, and so GM is a new company hoping to strive and survive the next coming years, which is another issue in question as well. But the question that he asks in his book is a very interesting question: who really owns GM at the time? And his answer was, which was alarming and really true to the topic at hand, is that the employees had owned GM. And what he meant by that is that a lot of the money and investments tied to GM, because GM, you have to understand, is a company that's been around for many years, and has had thousands upon thousands of employees, which equals out to pensions and liability. So GM was in a situation where the next coming years, or even right now, as these baby boomers start retiring, he had to pay out lots and lots of money. And also, you could look at how GM, manufactured a lot of cars. Let's say whether there was a tremendous demand or need for all these cars, it doesn't matter. That wasn't the biggest question at hand. The question at hand is the amount of employees that GM had to take care of once they retired. And that's what caused GM to collapse. And so the same issue that you're looking at for government employees right now who think they have a safe, secure job with benefits, well, understand that in the next coming years, and especially 2012 and also 2015, as baby boomers retired around that time period, that you'll find a lot of state government agencies are going broke because they cannot financially afford to take care of, just like GM employees that's been there for 30, 40 years. And a lot of people back in the 60s and 70s and 80s also clinged on to working at a government job because they were told that was the best secure possible job they could get. And it was true at the time, but there was also a financial burden that's attached to that. And so you're going to see that come to reality the next coming years as state governments, and the reason for this topic, finding ways to solve that problem of just having promised so much yet can't afford to pay back what was promised to employees. And so why should you worry about this situation? Because the so-called government is doing okay. That's what you hear in the news. It's improving. Well, what's the need for this article to be written in the first place? Because if you recall, the beginning headline says that states are looking into this problem that they're having. And so when you're looking at your finances, just like if the state look at its own finances, you got to look at the bigger picture, not just the basic day-to-day thing you're trying to do for survival. You need to look at the overall impact of economics to you and how things are changing around you. And so it's very important that the states look at this situation, because there are some major states that are in dire need of a financial bailout. In particular, California, a lot of people know about California as being one of the big states, but Illinois is probably right behind them, if not first. You look at New Jersey, New York, Florida, West Virginia, and Michigan. And so these are some of the states that I've read about in the past and talked about some of the situation that they have. Again, this is another show for that, because there's some serious things that these state agencies have done with people's pensions that people are not made aware of, and they believe that they could just do the 30, 40 years and then retire and they will have their pension secured and intact. And that's really not the case, folks, and you need to be aware of that. And so in closing, I want to let you know that this article will be made available to you for you to click on and actually read it and fully understand the grasp of what I'm sharing with you and the importance of what it means to you as a person who's going to retire, whether or not it is the next 5 to 10 years, or if you're a baby boomer right now who's looking at retirement, and how this article is going to impact your life and how seriously you need to take it. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure, the first show to be doing, and I look forward to talking about many shows. Hopefully this was a very enlightening show to help you understand your finances. So that's our show for today. Thank you very much. And remember, this is Voices for the Voices, brought to you by Frederick Media Production, a subsidiary of Frederick Capital. Thank you and have a good day.